Good morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another Constitutional Talk. Here on Constitutional Talks, we talk a lot about original intent, uh, textualism, what the text means. And I go with originalism and textualism because there's no other way to discuss it. The living, breathing theory is simply a theory that was brought forward virtually 100 years ago. And it's a way of getting around what was actually written in the text so that it could mean virtually anything. If I was to sit here and argue a living, breathing theory, I wouldn't even know where to begin because it could mean anything to anyone at any time. And that's the problem with it. The idea that what would our founders have done if they lived today is so subjective, there's no way to really hammer it down. Some years ago, I was in the trades, the building trades. And the company I worked for had a disagreement with the union, and they were battling it out in court. And in the middle of this, there was an election for the head of the union. They opposed the head of the union. And when they lost, they went through the bylaws, through the Constitution, looking for some way to get around the election that occurred. And this is no different than what happens in politics in other realms. In 1963, in November, we were in the beginning of an election for president. And Goldwater was way ahead of Kennedy in the polls. And so Kennedy was about shoring up his base, and he wound up being assassinated. And if that wasn't bad enough, for the Republican Party trying to run against a president who had been assassinated was really more than they could bear. There was just no way you could win a race running against someone who had just been killed. And so obviously his successor won. Now I'm glad that we're getting information, records are finally going to be released of the assassination, and we can all decide what really occurred there. I was always in the vein that it was one man with Oswald, but I don't really know any more than anyone else really does. The point I'm getting to here is in the election of 1964, the Democrats were trying to point out that there was a violation in the Constitution and that Goldwater had no right to run. Why? Because Goldwater was born in Arizona. And Arizona at the time of his birth was not in the United States. It was a territory, not a state. And this is where I go with all these kind of things. Just recently, they were trying to deny Donald Trump access to the ballot, claiming that he was somehow involved in an insurrection. And you go to the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and yada, yada, yada. And this is the problem with getting into the weeds on all these things. It violates not only the language, but the intention of the section. And that's where I want to go to today, because I keep hearing these things and seeing things that people are coming up with these crazy notions. And I feel I have to just talk about it and dispel some of these ideas. When you lose or are losing, your party always wants to come up with a reason why you can't do this or that. Like the Obama birth certificate fiasco. And let's say he wasn't born here. You can't go back in history and unpresident a guy that served 8 years in president. It's just impossible. It's an impossible act. You can't rewrite history. So a couple of months ago, we were talking about the 22nd Amendment. And I'm going to have to go back to the 22nd Amendment because there's this theory that President Trump could somehow run again because it's not two successive terms. And the 22nd Amendment, if you remember, says no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. No person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. So now we have this weird theory that, okay, it's an election. It doesn't mean he can't serve. So we're going to elect him as vice president, get the president to resign, and voila, he can have his third term. Okay, it doesn't say that he can't serve 3 terms. It just says he can't be elected. But obviously, when we start talking about original intent, the intent of the 22nd is that he cannot serve 3 terms. And this all comes from Roosevelt being elected 4 times and serving 4 terms, and the power of the incumbency. But when we look at it and people say, well, it doesn't say that. Okay, it doesn't. But the intent is that he can only serve 2 terms. But we do have other sections of the Constitution. So if you go back to the 12th Amendment and the last section, and the 12th Amendment has to do with the Electoral College and electing a president. And it says in the last sentence of the 12th Amendment, it says, but no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. So he can't run as vice president either under the 12th Amendment. And that's where original intent becomes important, because the intent of the amendment is so that he can't run. These ways of trying to get around the Constitution, trying to find some vague law to discourage someone, this is an election process, and we have a president for a reason. We have legislative for a reason. There are rules we set up. The Constitution does actually matter. And I don't know how I can express that any more directly. It really does matter. The line of succession, we do have laws on the books discussing the line of succession. Now we come up with this other idea. And this idea is that Congress can just nominate and place him as Speaker of the House. So you would have our current president appointed after the fact as Speaker of the House, get everybody in his cabinet to resign, and because of the line of succession, he would naturally become president. These ideas are just crazy. And they run against the whole idea of the Constitution to begin with, and the rules that we have to live by. We have a Constitution for a reason. And that reason is because we needed one for a basic structure of government. And that's what the Constitution is. It's an outline. That gets filled in. It's a structure. It's your Constitution is your framework. Every single person has a Constitution. If you were to go to the doctor and discuss your Constitution, it means it's talking about your body. The country's Constitution is the framework. It's your frame. And try to find some way to squirm around and get around rules so somebody can do this or that is It's just crazy. Now, maybe the president's just trying to poke the bear, trying to get a rise out of people, trying to drive the opposition crazy, and that may be true. But he cannot be elected to a third term. He cannot serve a third term, at least not under the Constitution. Now, the Constitution was left open. We could pass an amendment and repeal the 22nd Amendment. We can do that. That's legitimate. And there is the answer of a way he could serve a third term. But the chances of the legislature, and let's forget about the political ramifications of the legislature not being able to get 2/3 of the legislature to go along. Let's assume that the legislature does go along and they send it to the states, and 3/4 of the states would have to ratify to get to that point, just to allow one guy to run. And that would take time. Would it be able to be done in 4 years? Maybe. Kind of doubt it. I kind of doubt that you could even get the legislature to go along and do that. But that is the only way to get around any amendments. We need to accept what the Constitution says. We need to accept the reality of the situation, not some convoluted theory about how we can get around what it says. The Constitution is an important document, and we should accept it, accept all of it. It wasn't written for Democrats. It wasn't written for Republicans, or it wasn't written for any other party that you might point to that we can somehow elect. It's written for a framework to self-govern, and we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Just because you burn the pie doesn't mean you throw the pie plate away. I really feel I had to come back, even though we just discussed the 22nd a couple of months ago, because these convoluted ideas aren't worth discussing. They aren't worth arguing about in public discourse. But here we are. We're back arguing about some vague theory that will never happen. And it should never happen, because it's crazy and ridiculous to assume that we got some way to get around our Constitution. We really don't, without 3/4 of the states and 2/3 of our representatives to go along with it. That's the only way. And with that, I hope you understand a little bit better. And hopefully next week we'll get back on our program and discussing the Constitution the way this channel's designed. Thank you so much for your time. We'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. You folks have a good day now. We'll see you later. Bye for now.